WBSM and the Chris McCarthy Show. We have, as I promised you, Michele McPhee is joining us here this morning to discuss the marathon bombing. Michele is, in my opinion, in the opinion of most people who follow the case, the foremost authority on the marathon bombing. And she wrote the book Maximum Harm, which I can't tell you enough. I can't recommend enough. Folks, we have a little technical thing going on there. Because the Red Sox were going to be on, and so there's some overlap there. But anyway, Maximum Harm is Michele's book on the marathon bombing, and you can get that by going to Michele McPhee, Michele with one L, michelemcphee.com. Good morning, Michele. Thanks for joining us.
I always love being on with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, this is wonderful, and as I point out to the audience, there's a lot of places you could be here on the anniversary of the marathon bombing, so we really appreciate it that you decided to spend some time with us here on WBSM. And of course, so let's talk about this, Michele, as if no one's ever heard you here before on the program, because I'm sure some of people haven't heard you, although we've had you on here a couple of times. And tell us first of all, Michele, this is the big thing. The government has admitted now that the Tsarnaev Brothers did not build the bomb, right?
They have said it in court records. They have said it in interviews, and they have said it during Dzhokhar Tsarnaev's trial that the Tsarnaev Brothers detonated those two blasts 5 years ago yesterday, but they didn't build those bombs. So the immediate and alarming question, at least to me, is then who did?
Right.
And nobody seems all that interested in finding out.
And isn't that the scary part? It's been how many years now since the bombing?
It's been 5 years exactly since the bombing. And, I'm watching some of the coverage, and to me it's incredibly frustrating. I want to, and believe me, first responders deserve celebrating. The victims, of course, should never be forgotten. But there are still unanswered questions, and I think that the reluctance for a lot of people to ask those questions is, as somebody who's been in this business for a long time, it's unnerving.
It's frightening because if the person who built the bomb is still out there, that means they could do it again.
Exactly. Of course they could do it again. And, this is not some theory. This is well documented that the government said that the bombs detonated 5 years ago yesterday were far more sophisticated than the ones that were contained in the recipe, How to Build a Bomb in the Kitchen of Your Mom from the magazine. They've said in court records that were unsealed, some of the scant records that were unsealed. If you recall, what's really, there are so many unanswered questions. I think you know this too. Mm-hmm. Number one, more than half of the case files in Tsarnaev's trial are still sealed. I have covered federal courts for a very long time, and I've never seen this before.
We're speaking with...
That's one.
Yeah.
Number two, we don't know who built the bombs. Number three, we don't know how Tamlin Tsarnaev got in and out of the country while on 2 terror watch lists. And 4, we don't know why, when he got back from that trip, he was suddenly on the fast track to citizenship.
We're speaking with Michele McPhee. You can go to her website, michelemcphee.com, to learn more about her. But she's an investigative reporter, and she's written an incredible book called Maximum Harm, all about the marathon bombing, which took place 5 years ago today in Boston, obviously. Michele, talk a little bit about that. How, when you say the Tamlin Tsarnaev came and went from this country, talk a little bit more about that. Where did he go?
So people forget, and this is why last night I'm watching James Comey and I was apoplectic, because one of the major criticisms that were leveled against the FBI, and among the questions that Bill Keating wanted James Comey to answer was, okay, hold on a minute. You had an open case against Tamlin Tsarnaev in 2011. He was put on 2 terror watch lists, and yet he still, using only his green card as identification, was able to leave the country and, more importantly, get back in more than 6 months later without even a hiccup. That made absolutely no sense. And one of the things that Keating said in an open hearing was, look, this seems a little odd to me that Tamlin Tsarnaev meets with his buddy, this Canadian boxer turned jihadi, William Plotnikov. William Plotnikov is taken out in a counterterrorism raid in July of 2012, and to use Bill Keating's quote, he beat feet back to the U.S. the very next day. How do you explain that? And to this day, no one's answered that question.
It's absolutely incredible. Now, they had no real visible source of income, right?
No, but Tamlin and I drove a Mercedes and went on an extended vacation for more than 6 months over in Russia, and it's completely unclear who was paying all the bills. I mean, I know we paid, the taxpayers, of course, paid for their lifestyle because every single member of the Tsarnaev family lived on welfare, and they lived in an apartment that was paid for with a Section 8 voucher. What's really interesting about that apartment, though, you recall 410 Norfolk Avenue in Cambridge, where they lived. I mean, look, you know, you could sound like you're going down a rabbit hole, but isn't it strange that that home was owned by a former KGB official and Russian studies professor named Alexander Lipson, whose prize student was a CIA officer who just happened to be the father-in-law of Uncle Ruslan Tsarnaev, who was Tamerlan and Djokar's uncle.
And of course that father-in-law was a CIA station chief, correct?
That's exactly right. He was a CIA station chief in Ankara, Turkey, and of course you might remember that's exactly where the family came. Now these are Russians who mysteriously got political asylum after they entered the country via where? Ankara, Turkey. The uncle was married to Graham Fuller, and if anyone Googles his name, you'll see Graham Fuller is very well known for this tactic of arming the Muslim insurgency to take on Russia. He was the guy that many people believe armed Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan before he bombed the World Trade Center. So this is a long-time CIA tactic to use the Muslim insurgency to battle Russia, but I think that this has gone bad multiple times now, and perhaps the Tsarnaev plan fits that same profile.
We're speaking with Michele McPhee, who's written the book Maximum Harm, which I can't encourage you enough to go out and read. It's a fantastic book. Let's talk about the UMass-Dartmouth connection because, of course, they're part of our listening audience. The younger Tsarnaev ends up going to school there, but he developed a relationship early on, even before he went to school, with a professor there. Talk a little bit about that, Michele.
Okay. Brian Glenn Williams. So Brian Glenn Williams was also a CIA officer. He talks about it quite a bit. And there was an intelligence report that came out of the Russian counterterrorism officials, the Interior Ministry, that said Tamerlan attended a conference that was put on by Jamestown. Now, Jamestown is a think tank that many people associate with the CIA. And you know who the keynote speaker was at this event in Georgia, Russia? Brian Glenn Williams. So Brian Glenn Williams, who was a UMass Dartmouth professor, you can look him up too. He is an expert on Chechnya, which is where the two brothers grew up and came from. And he tells the South Coast Today, the newspaper in your area, that he was corresponding with Dzhokhar Tsarnaev from the time he was a high school student at Cambridge, Rindge, and Latin. I mean, Chris, when you say this, doesn't it sound like a very badly written spy novel?
It really does. It really does.
It's all true. This is all documented. And he makes no bones about it. He said it, on the record that he was in touch with Dzhokhar. Well, during the jury, voir dire, they talked about how Brian Glenn Williams was slated to be a witness in the case, but for some mysterious reason, that guy never appeared in court and, hasn't talked about the Tsarnaev case since.
It's really, really quite, as you said, it's unbelievable, and it does sound like a badly written spy novel, except that people died here in Massachusetts. People died. People were maimed for life. We see that they're on TV. They'll be on TV. They've been on TV all this past week, talking about what happened to them. Do we have a theory, Michele, on why they did the bombing?
This is what my theory is. Tamerlan Tsarnaev goes to Russia. By all intents and purposes, it's a successful mission. They tracked and killed high-level terror targets, including his friend William Plotnikov. Tamerlan gets in and out of the country without a hitch, and within weeks of his return, his citizenship application, the one he was not eligible for because he had been arrested in 2009 for slapping his girlfriend around because she dressed too provocatively, is mysteriously reopened. And this is available for all of your listeners to look up themselves. Read number 2, how did an unemployed Muslim with a rap sheet become fast-tracked for naturalization when we all know that the ACLU has sued countless times saying that Muslims have been discriminated against in this process? These are Muslims who have been vetted, who have been sponsored by employers. They're having trouble getting citizenship. Why would this unemployed welfare-collecting criminal be on the fast track to citizenship? It should raise, I think, at least questions. And it appears that no one's interested in getting the answers to those questions.
See,
except for us.
Except for us. And Michelle has done incredible work. Again, her book is Maximum Harm. All right, so one of the most fascinating parts of this story is the confrontation between the feds and the Cambridge Police Department. Explain to us what happened and the timeline so that people understand why that's so important.
So we know that Chuck Grassley put this in writing in a letter to James Comey. Can you explain why the FBI was in and around the area of MIT and near the Tsarnaev's home on the night of April 18th before Sean Collier was executed? Now, to this day, Cambridge police and MIT police believe that the FBI knew full well who the suspects were, suspect black hat and suspect white hat. I mean, I've been a reporter for a long time. The FBI admits that it not only did they interview Tamerlan, but they interviewed his family members multiple times. So you're telling me that an FBI agent took a look at Tamerlan's and Ives photo and didn't recognize the guy? Right there, that stretches credibility, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So now the Cambridge police are getting 911 calls from people in and around the area of Cambridge and Central Square saying, there's a suspicious vehicle idling outside my home. Cambridge police would roll up to a sedan or to an SUV with dark windows. They couldn't run the plates. And they would say, hey, we need license and registration. And an FBI agent in one case rolled down a back window, flashed his FBI badge, and said, FBI, beat it. These encounters, well documented, this is all part of the public record and the dispatch records from the Cambridge police. There was multiple encounters between these FBI agents and unmarked cars and Cambridge police. And one of these Cambridge police officers actually remarked, these mother bleepers are here and someone's going to get hurt. And literally within the hour, Sean Collier was executed in cold blood, which is yet another mystery of that night. Initially, police said that 7-Eleven robbery was linked to Sean Collier's assassination. Then they recanted it. Then it got brought up in Robel Filipos, one of the co-defendants from your area, a UMass Dartmouth student. It came up that he indeed had identified Joe Tsarnaev from the 7-Eleven surveillance photos of that robbery. I obtained a video of the 7-Eleven robbery, and multiple law enforcement officials I've showed that to believe that Joe Tsarnaev was indeed on the scene of that 7-Eleven robbery in the minutes before Sean Collier was killed. So here's that whole other mystery is who was there, because, you know, the government during Joe Carr's trial, they showed a video from very far away of Sean Collier, the MIT police officer's killing. And the video shows what prosecutors described as two figures approaching the vehicle. Now, it was interesting to me upon rereading the testimony and some of the remarks that were made by prosecutors that they constantly referred to the people at Sean Collier's assassination scene as the figures or the people, but not the brothers or the bombers. So to this day, we don't, and Will Weinreb, who's a very well-respected federal prosecutor, Bill Weinreb said, you know, we don't know who pulled the trigger, but Joe Tsarnaev is guilty of Sean Collier's assassination because he was there. Now, I happen to agree with that statement, but it still raises the question, who actually shot Sean Collier?
And
it's an insinuation that it was Tamerlan, but they never, ever, ever say that in court.
It's and as you point out, it doesn't appear that anyone's investigating any of that anymore.
No. Nobody is investigating this. You know, I think as time goes on, people are asking more questions. For example, the man that they believe did rob that 7-Eleven robbery is a guy named Daniel Morley. I had a cover story for Newsweek in January of this year talking about Daniel Morley. I mean, first, you find it suspicious that 55 days after the Boston Marathon, this guy attacks his mother, sets her eyeglasses on fire, forcibly writes on her face, physically assaults her, saying, I've done something I'm going to have to answer to God for. Police arrive. There's a 4-hour standoff in Topsfield, Massachusetts. This guy threatens to blow up a plane and burn down his house. Finally, they bundle him into an ambulance. He's on his way to a mental institution to be evaluated. They get permission to search his room, and what do they find in there? A bomb-making factory. And it's not just bomb materials. There are signatures to the marathon bombs, including green circuit boards and the same size ball bearings that were used and continue to be festooned in the flesh of many of the victims. And guess what happened to Daniel Morley?
Tell us.
Nothing. His entire case was null-prossed by the Essex County District Attorney, despite the fact that his own mother told detectives in Topsfield that her son was friends with Tamlin Tsarnaev.
We're speaking.
And this is all part of a public record. Now, I've taken photos of the guy who robbed the 7-Eleven and a video of the 7-Eleven robbery itself, and that man has been identified multiple times now by family members, by friends, as Daniel Morley. So the guy who had all the bomb-making material found in his bedroom in Topsfield, Mass. on June 9th, 2013, has been identified as the same guy in the 7-Eleven robbing it when Joe Tsarnaev is in the backdrop. And you're telling me this guy's entire case gets null-prossed? Doesn't that seem odd?
Extremely odd. Extremely odd. We're speaking with Michele McPhee, who about the Boston Marathon bombing. She's the author of Maximum Harm, which is the definitive book on the case. Michele, so now Daniel Morley has an interesting situation because he becomes unavailable, right? And he gets some special treatment.
Yep.
Well, what happens to Daniel Morley?
Well, he goes into a mental institution for 2 years, and it's unclear to this day who paid for that. And he is released, and now he drives the elderly, even though he attacked his own mother and beat up her boyfriend too. He's driving the ride for the MBTA for the Greater Lynn Senior Services. Isn't that extraordinary? A guy who beat up his mother, beat up his mother's elderly boyfriend, is now driving the elderly in Lynn for the state.
You couldn't make it up. I mean, you really absolutely could not make this up, except it's true.
And this is why, listen, I'm not tooting my own horn, but Maximum Harm is completely annotated. Everything that I'm telling you, we've talked about this multiple times. This is all in writing. This isn't some theory. This isn't the ramblings of unnamed sources. This is all documented.
And folks, again, I'm telling you because the sad part is there could be other people like the Tsarnaevs out there, right?
Correct, of course. I mean, are they part of a larger cell? Why did they go to Watertown? What happened at 89 Dexter Avenue in Watertown, which is right near the shootout scene? I mean, these are all important issues. But instead, we've created this narrative where you have two lone wolf attackers who detonated these bombs even though they didn't build them. Tamlin is dead, Carr sentenced to death, case closed. Well, believe me, law enforcement did an absolutely amazing and laudable job of tracking these two brothers and bringing them to justice. But there's still a lot of unanswered questions, and I think the people are all too willing to just accept this explanation as, case closed. It's all wrapped up. Well, when we don't even know who built the bombs, how can we call it case closed?
Right. Right. We're speaking with Michele McPhee. Again, you can go to our website. It's Michele with one L, McPhee, Phee. And I'll give that out again when we let Michele go. But go to the website because you got to understand this is a top-notch journalist. She's written five books previously. She worked on the ABC investigative team, the national team. She's worked for most of the newspapers that you've heard of. Very, very qualified person. And as you're pointing out, you documented everything you have in this book. Correct, Michele?
Yes, it has been largely ignored and has had very meager sales. And I just shake my head and say, okay, well, I've dedicated, 5 years of my life to this investigation, and it doesn't seem, I guess it's all screaming in the wind because it's certainly not making a mark.
Well, we'll try to do our best because quite frankly,
but it's just, and honestly, it's not even about the book sales; it's about the truth.
Right.
And I think that we are deserving of the truth. People died, as you pointed out. Mm-hmm. We are talking about, look, you had Crystal Marie Campbell killed in the first blast, detonated by Tamlin Tsarnaev. That poor woman took one last breath, saying it hurts, and died holding her best friend's hand. Her best friend, Karen Ward McWaters, became one of 17 people who saw their limbs amputated. Of those 17 people who literally lost their limbs, 4 of them are double amputees. And then, of course, you have Lindsay Liu, who was a Chinese Boston University student. And that poor woman, I was at a conference last week at BU, and the dean, the pastor at the chapel there, just talked about, just how extraordinarily moving it was to see her entire family show up in Boston and leave Lou Lindsay's body here because Boston was so important to her instead of bringing her home to China. And, of course, how could we possibly forget little 8-year-old Martin Richard, with a smile as big as Fenway Park, Stop Hurting People, went viral all over the world. I mean, these are people. And then, of course, there's Sean Collier being executed, and Dennis Simmons died due to injuries he suffered during the bomb blast in Watertown. That's 2 dead cops. Dick Donahue was dead for 40 minutes, but by some miracle, he was able to survive his critical injuries suffered in that firefight in Watertown. So 2 cops dead, 1 cop critically wounded, ruined his career, he's off the job, 3 civilians, and yet people are not willing to ask these questions. It just is mind-blowing.
It really, really is. And I think everyone probably knows somebody who was either injured in the bombing or nearly injured in the bombing because, this is right around the corner from us. We're speaking with Michele McPhee, who's the author of Maximum Harm. Again, I can't stress enough how important this book is, how interesting it is as well, because there's just so many layers to this story. And it's nice to celebrate the victims and to honor how wonderful their healing process has been and put markers up. But as you point out, Michele, there's so much more to this story than what we know.
I just think that there are critical questions that remain unanswered, and unless everybody bands together and demands those questions, we're going to keep talking about utter nonsense. I mean, to me, last night I was nauseated listening to the top law enforcement official for a time, James Comey, talking about water sports with hookers and the president's hair.
Right.
And I think to myself, James Comey was the guy who replaced Bob Mueller, who was in charge of the FBI when the marathon debacle took place. And instead of asking questions about how the FBI failed us, and believe me, I'm not blaming the FBI for what happened at the marathon.
Right.
But certainly there should be some accountability into the fact that they had an open case against Tsarnaev and did nothing. That he got in and out of the country and the FBI did nothing.
And
yet we are still talking about the president's hair in Russia. I just want to remind everyone, one of the things that Bill Keating said when he got back from Russia with Steven Seagal, which is just another whole insane story, is the FSB was more cooperative than the FBI. And in light of today's events, don't you think that's an extraordinary thing?
Oh, it truly is, and I agree with you. I was watching
But people forget.
I was watching the Comey interview last night, and I thought to myself, I can't wait to get Michele's take on this.
I was apoplectic, and not because of what he was saying, or not because of politics, because I could care less. I care about truth, and
right.
And I at risk of sounding like a Marvel comic, there is something to be said about fighting for the truth and the justice for the victims. It has nothing to do with politics. And the fact that this guy is saying, I mean, just, I don't know, Chris, what did you think of that issue? I just saddened. This is the state of the Department of Justice right
when you think about that they oversaw such a botched investigation, or worse, in the case of the marathon bombing, because I think, as you've pointed out, they're not telling us what they really know. I like that you pointed that out, and I want to make everyone understand this. No one's saying the FBI had anything to do with the bombing of the marathon.
Not at all.
No.
I mean, in fact, I think that there were agents that slept in their cars and killed themselves, quite literally, to bring, that had nothing to do with this at all. I don't think that this was rank and file. This was at the highest levels of the DOJ and the State Department, frankly, because that's where the CIA is based.
Right.
So this is not the rank and file guys who went out there and collected evidence and slept in their vehicles and worked around the clock, bringing these 2 brothers down. We're talking about the highest levels of, Langley and Quantico.
This intersection of the Justice Department and the CIA and the State Department, this whole world about which we're not allowed to know about.
Well, and that's why I say it's like a very badly written spy novel, because if I wrote this as fiction, people would be like, "Police." But every single thing that I'm talking about with you right now is fact.
Facts.
And I have all of it in writing.
Absolutely. Well, Michele, I'm gonna let you go. I really appreciate you spending some time here on the 5th anniversary of the marathon bombing to discuss the case and your investigation of it in your book, Maximum Harm. Thanks so much.
No, thank you so much. I love your show, and I really appreciate you having me.
All right. Thanks, Michele. Have a great day. That was Michele McPhee. Again, now her website, and you've got to go check this out. It's Michele McPhee. I'm going to spell it for you. MiChelemcphee.com. Her resume is impeccable. She knows what she's talking about. It's frightening, actually, when you think about the cover-up, the fact that people are dead, that it's probably everybody in this audience knows someone or knows someone who knows someone who was either injured or killed at the marathon bombing. One of the perpetrators was right down the street here at UMass Dartmouth. You probably remember the helicopters. Some of you may have been students at the time or live in the area. It's incredible. Take a very quick break. We'll be right back.